So welcome everybody. My name is Virginia Rammou and I'm a senior lecturer in architecture. So that's what I have trained for, and I worked as an architect for a period of years. And now I am the head of architectural technology at the Mackintosh School of Architecture in Glasgow. But my research interest is about how architecture and death relate. And I've been working on that for some years, and I'm doing a PhD as well about how architecture and space of death relate. So this workshop today is to kind of start understanding more about what kind of choices we have when it comes to our own death, and if we do have any choices. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share my little so it's here, and I have to go to tools. Okay, so I hope you can all see that. So how do we decide where we die? This is really the question we're going to be asking today. We just need to check how do we make this decision? What is it that allows us or doesn't allow us to make these decisions about how where we're going to die rather than how we're going to die? And I'm going to unshare. I'm going to stop sharing because it doesn't like, I'm sorry about that. It doesn't like the PDF. It wants the actual PowerPoint. So if I start with that, my apologies. I'm going to share again. It's a bit like teaching during the pandemic. So there we are. And this now is going to go. So how do we decide where we die? There we are. And what I've included here are a couple of pictures from drawings from Edward Munch. And it's interesting that, you know, he really looked at how people, the setting of one's death room. So he has one of the drawings or the paintings, Death in the Sick Room, 1893, and then By the Deathbed in 1895. And what's really interesting in those drawings is that, of course, is the person who's dying, but the nexus of people who are there surrounding this person. So death doesn't really happen in isolation. It can, but culturally, we see death as an event which totally encompasses other people, either by necessity or not. And I've got a timeline here, which is really to look at the place of death in the last 200 years, really. So before the Industrial Revolution, in the mid-1800s, most people died at home. And actually, it was the rich people who were the ones who wouldn't die at home, or there was some provision for care, but the vast majority of the population in the UK died at home. And I'm going to expand that in Europe, died at home. And then around from 1900, so some years into the Industrial Revolution, 85% of people continued dying at home. And of course, what happened there was that quite a lot of people left the rural areas and they moved into urban areas. And then we have the workhouses in the UK. So a lot of people start having a different way of of life. So the way that the percentage people started dying at home started getting less. Mid 20th century, 50% of people die at home. And then again, we look more into the early 21st century, where the most common place of death is acute hospital wards. So more people now start dying or are dying in the hospital. And of course, this has to do with the kind of medicalization of death, but actually with the medicalization of our own lives as well. So we live longer, but we have medical interventions which help us live longer. In 2008, we've got the End of Life Strategy report, and within that report, in England, only 18% of the deaths have occurred at home. So here it is, we have a huge shift between 2008 and, Industrial Revolution, mid 1800s, where the percentage of people dying at home before the Industrial Revolution, and then almost 20 years ago now, only 18% of people are dying at home. So is that a choice? Is it something that just happens? What are the drivers? As an architect, I'm looking at a place through the architectural definition. You might be some here today who are from different backgrounds, so you might have a different perception of place, but in architecture, place reflects culture and is a location which is created by human experience. So a place is not considered as a subjective or as an abstract concept, but it is a location, or is it part of a space which really has an identity through the factors inside it which have got value and meaning. So it's really, really important that, when we speak about a place, it really has extra factors really which make it pertinent to where people want to die. It's not just a space, it's not just a location, but it has so many other nuances within that. So that's what how I look into my research and in my interest about where people die, how people die. So the question for today is, have we got a choice for the place of our death? How? Who decides where we're going to die? And it's very important. Do we have that decision? Do we really are the ones making the decision, or are there other influences to allow for this decision to happen? And what are those influences? So according to Richards, that's Naomi Richards from the University of Glasgow, the survey data we have about the preferred place of death is flawed, and any reference really have got some different factors that really influence where people want to die. And these factors are age, gender, ethnicity, cultural identity, previous experience. So have they been ill before? Did they have a near-miss experience or whatever? What disease they might have and what the stage of the disease is. And then, of course, what happens to the nexus of people? What happens to these two photographs, the two images of the people surrounding the one who's going to die? What about family? What about caring responsibilities? What about socioeconomic factors? So it's really a very complex area to kind of look at. So what I've got here, I've got some parameters as allocated before: age, gender, ethnicity, cultural identity, experience, stage and kind of disease, family and caring responsibilities, economic factors, and other. So what I haven't thought, please let me know, because that's very, very important to kind of start unpicking, deconstructing what parameters make people decide where they're going to die, how they're going to die. So a little bit about the timetable today, the welcome and introductions. Now, I introduced myself, but I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself if you want after this presentation. The setting out of the workshop, which, you know, is really about what the question is. Then I'm going to ask you about having any of your own questions, if you're clear about what we're going to do. And then we're going to move around, into 3 very distinct 20-minute kind of areas. One is the discussion of the parameters, how the age, gender, social activities, you know, family have this influence into how do we decide, where do we decide where we're going to die. We're going to have a break, and then I would like to hear if you have any stories. That's another distinct 20-minute time, where what have we heard, what are our experiences, would you like to share them, to see again how the parameters and what we know as a lived experience might come together. And then another 20-minute slot where we're going to discuss overall what we found, what we think about today's workshop. And then we're going to finish. So really, it's a very interactive workshop. It's really about you bringing in, and me and Georgina bringing our information. Of course, the subject is quite painful. So if you need any time to break out and, you know, have a break, please do. You know, we need to do that to help each other, but at the same time, I don't want anybody to feel very upset about any of the issues that they hear. They might listen. But I want us to be as open as we can, and as the workshop is not going to be disseminated outside of this room, this is all confidential, so we can be as open about our views as we can and as we want. So I'm going to ask you if you'd like to introduce yourselves, to tell us what your background is and who you are, so then we can see how to take the workshop further. I think we're 1, 2, 3. We're 10, so I don't think there's a point of splitting, Georgina. We can all be in one room and then take it from there. So would it be okay for me to ask to identify yourselves? If I'll do it through my screen. So if I can see Anna next to me on the screen. So Anna, would you like to tell us a little bit about who you are? Hello, Anna.
Hello. Hi. Yes, I'm Anna Wild. I'm doing a part-time PhD on the death positive movement, and I'm in my 5th part-time year. I'm also a director of a death education charity, and I work part-time for an organisation that works with volunteers in graveyards.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anna. I've got Tessie.
Yes, hello. I'm a postdoc based in Brussels at the moment. I'm a bioarchaeologist, so I work with human remains, and I look a lot at isotopes of mobility in people who have been cremated. So this is why I joined the workshop and was quite interested to kind of think about how we choose where we die and how that ties into mobility, etc. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Madeleine.
Hello, everybody. It's nice to meet you all. Yeah, so I'm here today because I'm a qualified coach, and within my work, grief and loss is what people bring to the sessions often. And within that, the decisions around where we die and how that impacts our grief and the choices that we have or don't feel we have is always something that makes me quite curious because it plays heavily within someone's grief. So when I saw this was advertised, I thought, oh, this speaks to a lot of or the question that people hold often in a time where there's nothing they can do to change it rather than thinking about it potentially ahead of time.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Mateusz?
Hi, hello. I'm Matheus. I'm the second year PhD student in Italy. My research is about burnout and vicarious post-traumatic growth in deaf care workers. And I'm also a psychotherapist working with grieving patients.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Eriselda? Sorry if I mispronounced your names. I'm so sorry.
No, you said it very right. Thank you very much. Nice to meet everybody. My name is Eriselda Zere. I am originally from Albania, but I'm living currently in Greece. I am on my third year of PhD, and my research area is about intimate partner violence among heterosexual and homosexual and LGBTQ plus community. And recently I was eager about the thanatology issues generally. And with my professor, we wrote an article about the symbolic death and necropolitics of trans communities. So I found this workshop very interesting, and I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you very much, Eriselda. Thank you. Oyunda? No, I definitely mispronounced that. Oyunga. Hello. So I can't hear you. You're on mute, sorry.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. So
There, I can hear you now,
yeah.
yes.
No, so it's Oyunga.
Oyunga, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's nice to be here. I'm a Kenyan living in Amsterdam. My background is in journalism and anthropology. I kindly just finished writing a book on death and mourning, drawn from my own personal experience. I found this topic fascinating because one of the things that strikes us as migrants living abroad is, well, we're going to die. And I'm kind of addressing all of those topics in my own personal reflection, but also looking at the politics of death within an African context living in diaspora. So lovely to be here. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And it's amazing what you said about, where we're going to die.
Yeah.
Yes. Sarah?
Hi, hello. Well, it's really nice to hear from all of your backgrounds. I'm not from an academic background myself. I am a French funeral worker living in Scotland. I am a polyvalent funeral employee, so I do everything across the industry, and I do travel a lot for work as well. I'm part of the Réseau Les Morts, which is a francophone initiative for giving access and bringing together researchers and cross-disciplinary subjects, anthropology, archaeology, criminal right, ergonomy, geography, everything death adjacent. And it's really nice to be here with you all today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And Dee? Hi.
Hello, everyone. My name is Di. Nice to meet you all.
Hi, yes, it rhymes with hi, sorry.
All good, no problem at
But
all.
I didn't read it, sorry.
No problem at all. I am, let's see, similar to Sarah, I'm not from an academic background. I have a deep personal interest in care in death and dying. Let's see, over the years, I've volunteered as a suicide prevention counselor. I've volunteered as a companion for elder care for senior citizens. And I I'm coming here through the Order of the Good Death, which is an organization based in the US. Oyunga, I also empathized with some of what you shared because I'm first generation born and raised in America. My parents fled Vietnam like as refugees after the fall of Saigon. And so America is home. However, or America was home, but I'm now currently living in Portugal. And my parents themselves are also now, as they are aging, are also thinking about where do we want to die and what is home anymore? Do we recognize Vietnam? Do we recognize America in its current state even? So I'm very glad to be here with you all. And for work, I work in a different field. I work in tech. I work in the field of responsible AI, user experience design as a consultant and as well as a coach.
Thank you very much, Dan.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. And Delphine says she cannot speak because she's in an open space. So thank you, Delphine, for sharing that. She's a designer in France, and she's working on funeral places, and again with a group of researchers in France on the subject of representation of the death and the places where it takes place. So that's very, very helpful. So it's very good because we've got such a different backgrounds and we can really, and we're in time as well, so can really speak about those choices and very nice to as well having the extra layer of as you said, you know, people who have left and where there might been like immigrants and, you know, this kind of issue about where we die, which again goes into this other category of mine, which I hadn't, I'm not going to say I haven't thought, because you can hear I'm not a native UK speaker, but it's one of those things that, you know, somehow goes different draw until you really kind of start thinking about them. Have you got any questions from me about anything that you want to clarify, or you might be not clear or unsure about before we start? Okay, good. So we're all kind of ready to go. So what we're going to start discussing the parameters. So where are we going to die? Where do we choose about our death? And actually, I'm going to ask a different question. I'm going to ask the question of how do we decide where we die? Do we decide where we die? So can we do a yes or no, very kind of quick? You know, if you ask, do we decide where we die? Would you say yes or no before we ask any other? So if we say yes, hands up. No, yes. So, or you can just type it, anything you prefer. So do we decide? Or you can speak, because we're a nice small group. So by all means, open your microphone and I'm going to say, okay, Georgina says it depends. So I'm going to go down. No, Aristella. No, Delphine. No, Junga. Depends, Tessie. Depends as well, but for most people, likely no. Die. And I'm going to say, I agree with you. I don't think that, yeah, Anna says probably not. Matteo says it depends. Can I hear from the people who say it depends, like Matteo's and Di and Georgina, why you think it depends? It doesn't have to be all three of you, but you know, I just went through the list of who said it depends.
I mean, I'm happy to jump in, but I feel like others should have their say. I mean, for me, I think, you know, it's context dependent, isn't it? You know, if I say I don't want to die in this awful office that I'm sat in right now at Durham, but like, you know, if my time is that, then this might be that way. Whereas, You know, perhaps if I had a particular illness or, you know, was much older and towards the end of my life and might want to die at home, it might be much more likely that that can actually be facilitated rather than like obviously a sudden death. Probably you can't really control that in any way whatsoever. But that's probably a bit simplistic, but that was my blunt way of it depends.
But you know what, it's really interesting you say that, because when I first started looking into the death kind of areas, I had made these categories where it was acute death, sudden death, and it really kind of brought the people who something happened, like an accident or a heart attack, and you know, you just die where you die, or you die in the hospital because they take you in, or as you said, if it happens later in life, or if there's an illness that you know about, and then you can try deciding where it's going to happen. So age is very important on that, I suppose. And at the same time, kind of, I'm going to say disease or what happened is a very important factor as well. Mateusz and Eriselda, what would you think? Mateusz, yes?
Yes, it's Mateus. I agree with Georgina. It depends of the condition and the time of the passing. If it is a patient in palliative care, probably the family and the patient can arrange the place. It might be at home, it might be a hospice. It depends of the condition.
But do you think that if it's a palliative care setting, if the person says, I want to die at home, why would you think that they would say, oh, if they say I want to die in palliative care? Actually, that's the question for the stories, so I'm going to leave it. I'm going to pause on that, but I'm just giving the game. So why would somebody want to die somewhere else? So don't say anything about that yet. Thank you for that, Mateusz. Thank you.
I would also agree on this. I would say it kind of depends on the kind of the amount of control that you have over your own death. And I think that's very much tied together. So if you, you know, if we're talking, for example, about suicide, then there is a certain measure of control that you're exacting. That obviously is tied to mental health and how much control you really have or not. But I think certainly then place is a decision factor.
Okay. Thank you. And Madeleine, you say in your comment that it brings to mind, is it purely our choice? Would you like to elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. It's what I'm thinking about. I don't know I answer it yet, but what I think, you know, listening to people maybe after death or when they have the I say advantage, but that's lack of a better word, of knowing a death is coming. When, you know, do you get to choose your place? I don't think it's purely one person's choice. I think that there's many other factors that come to mind listening to people. So it's and even my own experiences, I think timing.
Yeah.
I think other people's perspectives as well. Like I know I'm very comfortable talking about death and loss and how I would want to die if I have if I have a choice about when it happens and how it happens, like it's in terms of where. But a lot of other people aren't, so you don't get that chance to maybe voice preferences because other people aren't as comfortable.
Yeah.
So I think you know, it may be a case you want to talk about it with a loved one. You know, if in an ideal world, if we could choose where we die, where would it be? It's often a question that nobody else wants to talk about because it's something that they want to avoid.
It's a taboo, isn't it, as well?
Yeah, completely.
Taboo, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas for me, it's a healthier way of living because it's very much, you know, it's unavoidable, right? So, but not everyone sees it that way. So its perspectives, I think, also influence our choice of where we die or how we decide where we die.
And I think, yes.
And yeah, other people.
No, it's very good. Sarah.
Yeah, I think there's also a cultural and maybe systemic approach to see here. I'm thinking about my own experience. I've worked for years in care homes in France, and also I've observed how the NHS system here in the UK works. I believe it's a bit different, and in the UK would be easier for a dying person, end of life care, and that kind of situation of long-term illness, for somebody to be able to decide where they want to spend their last weeks, months, days on Earth, and with who, and as well for the family to be able to facilitate that. In France, it's less of an open subject. Once you're in a hospital or in an end of life care unit, it's much harder to come out of it if you so choose to finish your life at home or anywhere else, go to another facility. It's much more difficult.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. So there's a quite clear distinction between those. Di?
Thank you. Echoing, I agree with what everyone has shared so far, and to build on top of that, when you asked the question, Virginia, the first thing that came to mind for me was that saying that everyone dies, but not everyone gets to die well. And to me, I correlate dying well with the capability to choose your place of death, where and how you die. And so I agree with like all the different factors and variables that everyone's named. And it was interesting because I think my gut answer came from the other direction of like, well, if everyone dies, but most people don't get to die well, then that also probably means that most people don't have the capability to choose where and how they die. Therefore, it depends, but for most people, probably not.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think this is really interesting because, you know, I love that now because we're looking at it in this kind of broad kind of way of, you know, actually there's so many more things than just, you know, these parameters which I've bullet pointed, because all these parameters, of course, they go together, and all these parameters together, they make each individual case different. And you know, where are we as choice? Because again, and part of the modern way of living, we just really think that we have a lot of choice for a lot of things, but actually how true is that how many things are outside our own drawing hand of, you know, I'll do this because of that, and you know, and therefore have got a complete following of a situation where sometimes we cannot, you know, obviously things change. How do you think things like socioeconomic factors might have an impact into us being able to decide, or you know, deciding? Because very interestingly, Madeleine said, you know, people don't speak about that. There's a taboo. So, you know, how many of us have we asked a loved one, where would you like to die? And then, as Di said, it becomes at the very end when they're in a particular setting where that is voiced. And of course, you know, for me now, I think, how does it make somebody that, you know, that voicing at that point where they're quite, you know, vulnerable to start having this conversation? So it's a question mark there about, do we leave it too late to speak about where we're going to die because as a society we don't want to speak about something like that. And then of course it comes at the end and people might not know, or people might just say something. So, where is that? But how do you think an economic part might affect that? And I don't mean about dying, somebody says, oh, I'm going to go to Cuba, therefore I have the money and I die. I don't mean just about that, but I mean like living in a deprived area, or kind of other kind of barriers. Do you think they play, I don't know, I haven't got an answer, do you think they play any issues? Yes? Or Junga?
Yeah, let me give it a stab. One of the, at least I know from a diaspora background experience, is, especially if it's an older, because most people come here as adults pursuing economic opportunities. So more often than not, the vast majority of your family is back home. So if when facing the prospect of death, the obvious, I suppose, the ideal, just in a point of, is to return to community because that's what you're culturally used to. What death has evolved into, at least in this modern world, is, at least my experience here in the Netherlands, the whole death process is very pragmatic and it's very bureaucratic, and it's all about really costs, so as efficient as possible. I come from a cultural background where death is communal, so it's shared. So irrespective of, people come together and make it happen. Right? So there's always kind of like a crowd pulling in terms of the expenses required to bury somebody. So what more often happens here is that there's a lot of repatriation of bodies, and then, which then makes people have the desire that if you start ailing, you deal with the paradox of, more often than not, you're in the West because of the medical facilities, but then you have to make the choice now of, if it looks like I'm not going to survive, should I go back closer home? Only, but and this point is literally from an economic consideration, right? But more often than not, that conversation, as I think as Dai was saying, that conversation never really happens. I'm not sure who said that, but that conversation never really happens because death is so taboo that even the prospect of thinking you're going to die is out of question. Yeah. So then we're kind of stuck in this paradox of where, on one hand, we need even if just from a pragmatic perspective, just for your own family members, you need to make certain choices that make the process convenient. I mean, at least not too difficult. But at the same time, because we're so culturally, what do you call it? We're cultured into just a complete dread of death. Even the mere thinking of having a conversation like this is said to invite death. And you got to remember, and then when you have people from within a very deep religious context, there's a sense of surrender where that's not your play. You have no choice in that matter. So that's really, I feel, and especially from a kind of, I guess, if I speak from a very specific Kenyan perspective, and how as I start to study how people respond to death here, Africans abroad, and especially during the Corona period, and I'd ask this question of like, hey, what happens? What happens if it happens? What happens if COVID gets to you? What happens? And you can't even go beyond that barrier. Yeah, you can't even start. I mean, there's only one friend who ever told me that, listen, here's my number, and you take my number, and this is a number of a friend of mine, and you should give me a number of a friend of yours, just in case you die, somebody should call me.
Wow.
That's about the closest I've gone to somebody and that person unfortunately has passed on. And true enough, their friend called me, you know. So, but it's like a 1 in a million kind of example. Yeah.
I think you know that cultural part is very interesting because and again religion you know is not your place because a greater force is going to decide when you die, etc. And it's really interesting because sometimes there's a bit of you're not allowed to say it just in case you ask for it, you know, kind of what's the name of it? Not premonition. When you bring something bad, I can't remember the word
We
now.
just say invite it.
Yes, yes. So people are kind of worried sometimes that, you know, you spoke about the death, therefore the death comes, and it's a very interesting, and it happens still that in societies you know where people say let's not invite the bad into our homes kind of thing, and they really shy away from the conversation. I've got it's easier to look away than it is to confront. Absolutely, yes. As you say, Madeleine, people are scared. Yes, and until they have to. Absolutely. So we brought a bit of religion here. We brought about socioeconomic issues. We brought about age. What about gender? Sorry, Anna, I didn't see your hand. I'm so sorry.
I was just actually going to, just before you said about gender, I was going to say that I think as well, something that's quite a big part of it is that, you know, if you choose to, if you want to die at home, then your choice isn't actually just about you. It influences the people who you are expecting to look after you while that happens. And that for some people, that might be, you know, quite a traumatic thing for them to have to do and influence how they feel about the home afterwards, you know, that it's got sad memories for them. And so I think that's worth bearing in mind as well, because, you know, certainly when we're dying, we don't often do that totally alone, do we?
No, absolutely. And as you said, there might be children around and, you know, they get afraid, or kind of older people who, you know, you want to not, you know, you want to shelter them in a way if somebody younger dies at home. So absolutely, you know, the impact of dying at home and, you know, who lives with you at the time is so so important, so important.
And I think, you know, just picking up your point about gender, and so of course it often still is the case that it's women who do the nursing of the sick person at home, and so it does have more of a you know, it takes more of a toll really on women often who are trying to possibly bring up children at the same time as look after elderly parents who are dying. And so I think it is still very much, you know, a gendered issue really.
Yes. Eriselda, because you said you're doing a bit of research on the gender kind of, is it something would you like to bring from your experience, from your research on that?
Regarding the vulnerabilities of the groups as trans individuals, especially, or women, they don't have. I was talking about symbolic death actually, which can lead up to physical, real death. Regarding the gender, which is kind of systemic. issue, a structural issue, where policies, societal norms that lead this kind of these people to death, to necro wards. So of course gender plays a great role. And I can say also an example. I was working, I am a social worker, and I was working in an elder's home. And what surprised me there is the majority of the individuals that were in this home were women. And I asked the other social worker there, I mean, I'm really amazed that the majority of the people here are women. She said that it's really common, especially here in Greece, that when a woman gets sick or has issues with her health, it's very common to set them in a home away from home, um, uh, rather than women. The woman that the mother sends the father or her husband in care facilities.
Well, it's really interesting you said that, because there was an interesting article here last week about the impact in marriage from men or women having an illness. Found that in most cases, if a man was ill, the woman would remain in the marriage. But if a woman was critically ill, the marriage will crumble. So what was interesting in the findings as well was that there was an issue that, and I thought, and I can say that openly, oh, look, the men went away where the woman kind of stayed. But what they found in the research was that the women, having had such a huge impact in their life, where they had a near-miss experience or they might be dying, in a lot of cases, they initiated the divorce. So it was really interesting that when something like that happened, the women said, I'm going to go. And I'm going to change my life or how long I have to live. But what it shows in what you said again is kind of this, who takes care of who, which is what Anna as well spoke about. So, of course, if it's women and we do send them to the care home for some other person to take care of them, because, is it that we don't expect the men to take care of the women? Is it that they want to take care of women? What is it? Is it a societal belief that, a man cannot take care of a woman? Or is it, it's so I'm not going to say rich, because rich is not the right word, but it's so difficult to understand, where does it go? And, is it that these women say, I don't want anybody to take care after me because I've been taking care of people, so I prefer to go to a care home? Where in that spectrum of that decision making are we? Because of course, a lot of people, and it's a discussion with the assisted dying, that they don't want to be a burden, or a lot of people generally, they don't want to be a burden to others. So is that another another element which adds into that kind of idea of the burden? Or Younger?
I wanted to give another context as well. Oh, sorry, my video. Okay. I wanted to give another context as well. I'm just going to give you, because so a lot of the assumption here is that people then get taken to care homes. Within my cultural context, care homes are just not a thing. So you either die in hospital or you die suddenly. So literally, those are the two options. My dad, for example, died of a heart attack in the home. My dad and my sister died of heart attacks in their homes. Most other people, my brother died in hospital. So literally those are the two places. And then you'd say like road accidents and all. So when it comes to care, the cultural context of care doesn't come with the kind of expertise that is typically, I guess, expected here, of like somebody knows what to do in terms of, okay, this is what it takes to care for somebody who's ailing on the kind of the last legs of their journey. So often within the cultural context, it's just a social inability. People know what to do and just don't have that ability. And then also within a lot of, at least within my own socio-cultural context, you would find that it's also the language of care. How men are socialized to see care is that make sure you get the money, make sure you're able to transport to hospital, make sure you're always getting the medicine. So they see care very differently as, say, like if it was my mother, my aunties, there'll be more bedside care, there'll be more the physical, more the touching, more the intimate. But the men will be taking care of more the kind of, I guess, logistical elements of the care. So it's kind of, I think it's kind of, I've noticed, for me, I noticed it was really important to look at it within the cultural lens in order to understand and why there's this kind of distinctions between the response. So you'd find, for example, within our context that when for example, elderly mothers start to ail, when they get to an age where they're ailing a lot and they have to do a lot of hospital visits, more often than not, you find the men are very active in that. So if you find a family where there's different siblings, brothers and sisters, you'd find the men are very active in the actual transportation, who's driving mom to hospital, who's picking mom back home, doing that kind of stuff. If you see who's actually sitting in the hospital, you'd find it's the women. So you'd find more it's the women than who are sitting in the hospital, who are making just the kind of the more intimate care. So there's always that, at least within my experience, there's that social cultural separation that's based on our socialization.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sarah has said something. I'm just going to open it.
Yeah, so I just shared a sort of blog article that's been relayed by Marie Curie, and it cites a lot of studies on gender roles in the end of life care. So I'm sure you'll be familiar with some of them and maybe some of the people, but I think it's really synthetic, and it does bring some light onto that aspect of the gender disparities, at least in the Western cultures, because I do agree that there are lots of different ways in cultures and places around the world that are doing and experiencing things differently. But so this is the article I wanted to share, and also from my personal experience, the clients that I have and the decision makers for funerals are in a vast majority women, sisters, daughters, nieces, even friends are taking over the responsibility of arranging funerals for the person that have died, and also the women themselves are more proactive in seeking funeral plans for themselves and their families.
Great. That's very, very helpful. Thank you very much for that. Thank you. What I'm going to do is 3 o'clock. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to break here so we can have a comfort break. And then when we come back, we are going to continue, because I want to ask Anna something about her death positive research. But I'm going to leave that for after we come back for our break. And then we can share our stories, experiences, where, what have we heard, what have we seen about, where people die and how those decisions have been made. Are you all okay to break for 10 minutes? Yeah, okay. So let's come at 10 past for the other half of it. Thank you very much. Hey, so should we start? Again, one, two, three. What we're going to do on this second part is we can process a bit more of the first 20 minutes. If you have anything to add before we move into the experience. So I don't want to just abruptly cut the first one. Is it anything else that you would like to add about the parameters I have set for today before we go into the lived experience? So we've looked at age, we've looked at socioeconomic cultural issues, we looked at gender. Tessie? Yes.
No, sorry. Sorry, I was just about to say, could I see the slide again
Yes,
where you listed the parameters?
yes, I'm just going to share the screen. Just give me.
I would just kind of, I'm thinking about individual mobility, physical mobility as well. I mean, as a main factor, because if you can't, if you're not mobile yourself independently, then you are always, yeah, exactly. You're always tied to other people.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So I guess, yeah, physical ability.
Physical ability, absolutely. Yeah.
I guess it could stage in kind of disease, but even if you're not, if it's not a, a disease that is related to you dying, you're also you're more dependent on other things.
And you're right, because it might not be to do with age. It might be that it might have to do with age and not disease. It might have to do with disease and not with age. It might have to do with a disability, which is not related to age or the disease. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Somebody who's wheelchair bound but is dying. So, absolutely. Mobility is one of, yes, I haven't thought about that. And Madeleine says legal aspects. So Anna has just come. And what do you mean by legal aspects, Madeleine? Is it something that like being divorced or separating, or do you think?
Yeah, but personally and also like countrywide. So it depends what's legal in the country as well that you're in. I think that will factor.
Yes.
But also, for some people, if you're given power of attorney to somebody to decide and you don't keep it updated, or things change in between.
It's really interesting you say that, because there was an email the other day from the Glasgow NHS board, and it said how important it is for everybody to have power of attorney. And most people don't think of that. And it's really interesting that there it is, the main hospital kind of, the hospital board in Glasgow, sending an email saying, this is something that all of you need to start thinking about.
It's like builders, right? They have the house that needs the most work. So it's, we don't often, what we do professionally often is what we need to or give least attention to at home as well in our personal lives, because we're doing it with other people.
Yes.
Yeah, but I would also argue that, sorry, Madeleine.
Sorry.
Right. Sorry, I would also argue that that ties in with socioeconomic status, because if you have a lot of things that you have to have sorted before you die, who gets what, etc., you will also have power of attorney. You will have that sorted. This is one of the first things you will put in place, because you want to have you want to make that decision. Think also you will have the legal counsel to do that. So I guess the NHS is probably addressing an issue they have, because it's not in place in a lot of people, for a lot of people that do not have that background.
I think though it's
Possibly.
kind of different with say like your will to decide, you know, who gets what. Where
Yeah, but
I'm forgetting
I mean,
what the term is. It's not necessarily like, say for example, you know, like where I had a car accident, if I was then left in a situation where I wasn't able to make decisions for myself, who had I given those decisions to? And they would then be deciding on my behalf where I died. I've forgotten what the official legal term is for that.
Okay, yeah, you mean
that power of attorney,
but
rather
I
than
think they are very
deciding about the
often,
will aspects
yes,
of my, well, you know, estate, or whatever they call it in
I
legal
know, but I
terms.
think very often they are tied very closely together. Like when you do one, you usually sort out the other as well.
But it's really interesting because that kind of can bring us to the lived experience. What's the name? Kate Garraway, the lady on the morning TV, and her husband had long COVID, but she didn't have power of attorney. So there he's somebody who was totally incapacitated for a very long time, but she had no way of releasing the lease of his flat, or not his flat, sorry, his office, stopping his mobile phone, because of course they say, is this, you know, she calls, says, you know, is this, I would like to terminate this mobile phone number. Or are you the contract holder? No, I'm not, it's my husband. You know, and all of these things that we don't think about up until it's quite the end. And through my experience, a very good friend of mine who died of cancer, he got married 2 months before he died. And he had been with his partner for 30 years. Because, of course, through the law, the house wouldn't go to her because they were not married. And it's really, really interesting how they had to go and get married in a rush. And make sure that, you know, that all the aftermath of his death was going to not create a ripple effect for his family because of the legal issues. Anna, you're back, and I would like to ask you something, because you've mentioned you're doing the death positive, or you're looking at death positive movement, I suppose. And is it similar to the idea of a good death, or is it different to the idea of the good death?
Well, it's more than that. And I should just say that Di here is from the Order of the Good Death, who are kind of like the organisation which started the ball rolling with this iteration of the idea of sort of a combination, I suppose, of learning about death, knowing about death, you know, talking about death, that kind of thing. So, you know, I'm sure Di would have something to say as well. But yes, I think the idea of the death positive movement is that talking about death, you know, thinking about our own death and becoming sort of familiar with the idea of it means that we become less frightened of death, and obviously we are more aware of our choices, And so one idea is doing, making sure you've done the paperwork, as we were just talking about, the power of attorney, the will, and, all the advanced directive documents and all of those things. So that's part of what the death positive movement is about. I think it's something that people interpret kind of as they want to. So some people are quite what's the word, evangelistic about it, and other people just really adopt the idea that, talking about death and preparing for death are not morbid or unpleasant things in and of themselves, because, we are all going to go there. So it helps to alleviate some of the fear and anxiety. And of course, also the practical issues that arise when somebody has died. And as we've just been talking about, you haven't got the correct legal things in place. Which my mother, when she had dementia, and sort of while she was sliding into it, we were trying to persuade her to do a power of attorney, and she was a bit like Gollum, on The Hobbit, in that 1 minute she would say, "Oh yes, that's a very sensible idea. That's a really good idea," and then literally seconds later she'd be saying, "You're trying to get hold of my money. It's my money. It's not your money. It's my money." And I should say I had a very good relationship with my mom, prior to the dementia, but this kind of suspicion was all part of it. And it does make life very difficult. We ended up having to apply through the Court of Protection and all sorts of things. So yeah, I think I do think it makes a lot of sense to overcome our refusal to look these things in the eye, and and make sure that we do actually tackle them before we absolutely need to.
Absolutely. And there's this new, well, it's probably quite, oh, sorry, Tessie.
No, I would just pipe in. I think the death positivity sounds really, really interesting. I mean, so with the power of attorney, my parents did that at least 10 years ago with my sister and I. So they had us sign it, and they signed it, but they don't like talking about death at all. And but they're very pragmatic. So this kind of goes into what our colleague who has left said about the Netherlands. I think that's almost because I'm from Germany originally, and I think it's very pragmatic there as well. So I think this is where it's kind of come through as well, but it's not got the death positivity there at all either. It's very, it's very much Western death in hospitals. That's it, and death as a medical failure, and
I think though
those things.
quite frequently, I think it is there, but it's sort of it's not there as a kind of overarching thing. For my research, I interviewed 24 people who were. I contacted them through social media and asked for people who were practitioners of funeral practitioners or celebrants, not medical people, but death doulas, that kind of thing, and talk to them about what being death positive meant to them. And it's it's a very broad range, as I say, although now that Di's gone, I will say I think the order of the good death in America are a lot more, you have to do it this way, whereas whether it's because the people I interviewed were from America, but they were from other places as well, and they were very much more well, this is what I think, but I understand why people think differently.
So do you think it can be almost like a pressure into how good one's death can be.
I absolutely do, yeah. I really do. I think, you know, one of the things that got me interested in the subject, and I'll shut up, I don't want to take up too much time, but was the kind of correlation really between how childbirth was in the 80s when I was having my children, which was kind of like all very much, you know, if you just breathe in the right way, you know, you won't feel a thing sort of thing. And the similarities between that and death positivity, you know, were quite highlighted for me, really, obviously because of my age. You know, I remember it quite well. And I think, as you say, there is a pressure to die well. And as one of the people I interviewed said to me, you know, it's not just a pressure to die well, but, you know, that pressure is there for somebody else. It's my death, but, you know, I've got to make it acceptable and nice and all the rest of it for other people.
That's very interesting. That's extremely, extremely interesting, actually, because I have started getting those, I'm going to call them vibes, for the better word of it, that, you know, people, again, is it about curating one's own death sometimes? But, you know, so that might be some people, but then, you know, at the same time, yeah, no, that's very, very, very interesting. So I just saw a thing, my death is somebody else's grief. Tessie.
Thanks. Can I just ask, just for clarification, when we're talking about a good death, what exactly is it that we mean? Because my sister-in-law, she's a palliative care nurse in the NHS. And we recently had a talk because my mother-in-law died over Christmas. And she was in hospital for a long time and then in care, like in a care home. And my sister-in-law said that in all her years as a palliative care nurse, she has seen very, very few bad deaths, or hardly any, maybe one. And I think, you know, it kind of depends. I guess, you know, she is with a lot of people who are suffering, who are in pain, who she helps. But, you know, the question is, you know, what do we understand as a bad death in that context then?
I'll tell you from my research, and the idea of a good, I would agree. The idea, you know, the actuality, the mechanical part of dying, you know, the death rattle and, you know, the last breathing and all kind of stuff it's quite beautiful in a way. It's the opposite of a baby being born. Baby is born and takes this big breath and cries, okay, or cries and stuff, and there's elation in the room, I suppose. But and it's pretty much the same when somebody dies. I'm going to say mechanically, okay, so the mechanism of the death, you know, last breath, and, you know, it goes. So I suppose the idea we have probably is from media, film, whatever, you know, this kind of, again, like laboring in movies and stuff, where it's like horrible and puts you off forever, is not the same kind of in real life. So that's the kind of similar thing with the death, the way it's portrayed out there, than the actuality. So that's the one thing. But there's another part about the idea of a good death, which really has to do with the lack of provision of comfortable end of life. And that was before the St. Christopher's Hospice and Cecily Saunders in 1967. So up to then, hospice there was hospices, but the idea that you could give morphine and you can medicate the ones who were critically end of life, they were end of life, was not happening. So Dame Cecily Saunders sifted that with the new design of what they call the modern hospice movement. And that brought this idea of the good death. And that kind of brought these issues that, you have to encompass a peaceful death, a comfortable end of life, and death. People shouldn't suffer, so therefore you can give them pain relief. They need to be listened. If they have any spiritual or any other wishes that they need to be voiced, they have to be listened if they're voiced. So it kind of created this framework that the person who's dying, in order to have a good death, they need to be listened. And if they have any special issues that they would like to bring into, as I said, and that's very much about cultural and religious beliefs, that they had to be listened. So that's the kind of, and I found it quite interesting when I started my research as well, because even on a violent death, the actual passing of life is quite how should I call it? It's quite passive, if I can say that. There's no, even if it's a violent death, the moment between life and death, it's very fine and quite quiet in a way. So I don't know if that explains it properly for you, but the good death is really about this other kind of criteria which allow people to have a better death. I think it's about being heard, and again, there's a huge relationship between childbirth and death. It's really interesting. Again, if one has heard or read the kind of report about maternity care and expectant or new mothers not being listened, I suppose speaking and not being heard, all this kind of stuff. A lot of that was happening with people who were about to die, and the thought that they were not being heard. So it's really about being heard. Any other kind of experience you would like to share from from stories about how people decided where to die? Mateusz, you were speaking before, and you had something interesting, and I interrupted to say we're going to speak about that now.
Actually, I don't recall what I was what I was telling you guys later, but I can share some that I'm afraid of. I was born in Brazil and I live in Italy, and although my family is Italian, they all live in Brazil right now, since I was born. And one of my fears is to die in Italy and to leave my family with the bureaucracy of bringing my body. So I think this is also interesting when we talk about those parameters that you mentioned earlier. That is the bureaucracy of dying in a place that you don't belong to. And transporting your body. This is something that freaks me out. Passing in Italy and leaving my family with that.
It's quite interesting because many years ago, I had gone with an elderly member of my family to Asia, and I said, and this elderly person didn't want to have insurance, health insurance. Okay, it was like, oh, why does anybody need travel insurance? Okay, why do they need to? And it's like you have to have travel insurance. No, whatever. And the only way I was able to get my way, because I didn't want to travel with them without a travel insurance, because they were quite, you know, they were not very old, but they were elderly. I said, look, if something happens, you need to get repatriated. And I haven't got money to repatriate you. And your family hasn't got 15 grand to repatriate you. So you need to get travel insurance to repatriate you. He signed it straight away. Because it was like, oh yeah, you know, and it was really interesting, this kind of idea of like, not just the cost, because it would have been, you know, £15,000 to come back, but it was really about, yes, what happens if I die in the middle of nowhere, you know, and we were going to the middle of nowhere, how we're going to go back, you know, and yeah, the bureaucracy is a huge thing, and especially for people, as you say yourself, myself, you know, who are from somewhere else, and they are somewhere else. And the point is, you know, would you want to go and die in Brazil? You know, if you had a choice, would you go like, yes, you know, I have my life in Italy, but then when that point's come, you know, here I want to go, in inverted commas, to home, kind of thing.
Yeah, and then it's another problem. How can I just live my life here, the people that I have here, and go to die there?
Yes.
It's a very difficult situation, actually.
Because you have roots in both places.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I think this is quite interesting in terms of it's not a privilege at all to know that you're at the end of life or whatever. But if you're just, again, living your life and you might just drop dead suddenly, that's one thing. Whereas if you're actually being clinically defined as at the end of life in palliative care, I don't know, there's two dynamics here. Like, we're talking about where would you want to die and what those circumstances might be, perhaps. Like, that's like one question. But then we're also encroaching into what do you actually want to happen after you die? You know, it's not just the process of dying. Like, there's been a lot of discussion about what comes afterwards. And I mean, my previous research has been about, you know, methods of body disposal. And so that there's funeral choices that might be made. And obviously it's a rounded circle, right? It's not one without the other. But I do think it's interesting as to where, not the line is, but what part we're actually talking about with these decisions. And I think the sort of socioeconomic side of things as well, when we've been talking about like power of attorney and who gets to choose and whether you die at home or this or that or the other, there's a lot of context which obviously surround those decisions and how, whether you could go or not go. Anyway, I'm rambling now, but I just think there's so much in all of this. Like, when you start to unpick it, obviously that's going to be the case. But yeah, that's what I keep like sort of circling back to. It's that bigger picture. Yeah. Sorry. I don't want to ramble.
It's not. I think it's really important to say that, Sarah.
Yes, for you people who have expressed the concern about being repatriated, I would like to know your reasons for considering this. Is this something that you want for yourself? Is it something that you have discussed and you want, that your family want for you in the event that it was happening? Why? I would love to hear where it comes from for you.
Who wants to go first? I can go as well, but who? Matthäus, do please.
Yes, I think, I mean, to die, all you need is to be alive. So it might happen at any time. So this is something that concerns me, and I try already to talk about this with my family, and I already spoke with a lawyer to arrange everything. So like doing all of the bureaucratic process to avoid all of the stress. And if I had the chance, if I knew I would die, I would also to try to plan like living funerals, so I can say goodbye to both places.
Yeah.
And my concern, it's not how or where I'm going where I'm going to be buried or cremated or something like this, but how my family is going to process this. How will they live the grieving, and how my passing in another country will affect their grieving process. This is what concerns me. This is what I'm trying to think about in order to avoid like a traumatic grieving or something like this.
Okay, well, thank you very much for sharing that. The concept of living funerals actually makes a lot of sense in this situation. So yeah, thank you.
Something, because I'm going to say something which is totally opposite to Mateus, and I hate the cold. Okay, I really don't like the cold.
Okay.
I don't like the heat, the intense heat either. So for me, it's like, where can I go for my last home where I won't be in a very wet place, okay, where it's going to be
Not Scotland.
not Scotland, see? And it's really interesting how that kind of thermal comfort, okay, which is really what I do in my everyday work, has got something to do about, you know, wanting to go somewhere back, which, you know, so it's very selfish. It's not about the other people's grief, which is, you know, not selfish at all. It's very selfish because I'm thinking, you know, am I going to be on a very damp, you know, if I get buried in a very damp soil for the rest of my life, and I don't like that. So it's quite interesting that, you know, for me, it's like I want to go somewhere where I'm going to feel comfortable. As for the heat, yes, environmental and emotional needs, absolutely. Yeah.
True death. Okay, that's really, yeah, that, thank you for sharing as well. That's something I've never considered for myself, and this is not really something that I've heard either from my clients. So yeah, if emotional and environmental needs after death. Okay, thank you, thank you.
Griselda and Tessie after.
Okay, thank you. Regarding what Mateus and you, Virginia, was talking about, according to Sarah's question, it brought up to me the, you know, we are thinking of ourselves, like where I want to die, how I want to be buried, or anything, how I want to be grieved. But what I'm thinking of is like we have our parents, our loved ones, and when we think of when they are going to die, especially because it's a taboo issue, as we have discussed before. You know, for example, lately I've been thinking a lot about the death of my parents, for example, for the death of my mom, of my mom's death. And I was thinking, you know, we never talk about it because it's taboo. But when this comes, I don't know what to do because I don't know what she prefers. I don't know how this works.
Yeah.
I mean, because my mom also, she's an immigrant. She lives here in Greece, but she's originated from Albania, and I don't know where she wants, what she prefers better. I
Yeah.
will only talk about the good death, the happy death. She wants to be as easy as possible. That's the only thing because it's a taboo.
Absolutely. You know, it's really interesting, this thing, especially with people who have moved from somewhere else. Tessie and then Anna.
Okay, thanks. I was just thinking about then, you know, how you said at the beginning that your idea of place is very kind of in the sense of a location. And I think that sometimes when we're thinking, like when we're thinking about where we want to die or how that's tied in with the grief of our relatives, we're thinking of our remains, you know, how they are emotionally tied up with the place, you know, that's home for us, I guess, you know, that's more emotional rather than necessarily a physical location always, you know. I mean, if you have or it is tied up with the physical location, but more emotionally, perhaps than, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it made sense in my head.
No, it's good. It's good to say that though, because it's really important to kind of see the two, you know, the sense of place, which is something
Yeah.
that means something to somebody rather than just, you know.
But also then you know, that your family, you know, also the idea that your family has or you culturally have about the kind of physical remains of you, you know, if you need that physicality in the same place where you can grieve, you know, if your remains are not in Italy, for example, Matteo's, and you know your remains are being sent back to Brazil, that you know, your family or your relatives or your friends in Italy, you know, cannot grieve properly because you're not in this place physically anymore. You know, I guess you have that question to deal with. And I guess, you know, there is always, because I deal a lot with cremation, there is a lot of in the past where you have small remains, small parts of remains in cremation cemeteries. And the idea is always that, sure, there is a preservation issue, but sometimes we know that these people, you know, only buried part of the remains, and we have no idea what people did with the rest of the remains. So that is very much tied to place as well, you know, because you have parts of individuals that are, you know, taken to other places or, you know, put elsewhere in the landscape, and so you're creating these very emotional landscapes and that landscape of grief, I guess, as well.
Absolutely. No, the landscape of grief, that's pretty amazing actually. Anna?
Yes, I think just kind of picking up on that really, that thing of, you know, where you belong, your sense of place, and how I read that, you know, in general, big generalization, but that people are going off the idea of sort of scattering ashes because it doesn't leave them, you know, a place where those ashes are. And I always sort of thought, oh, you know, I'd be scattered at sea or, you know, somewhere that I love. But as I've grown older, I think I kind of agree with that. And the idea of you sort of being in one place is weirdly important in a way which I can't really define it, you know. But it does seem to be more important to me. And I'd been to something, this is going back a few years, and we had to kind of like sketch out our you know, in our heads as to where our perfect place to die was. And I live in a very beautiful place. My house is in the middle of a field, and it's got a brook nearby and everything. And I have a swing seat in the garden, and I thought, oh, you know, this is where I'd like to die, you know, on my swing seat, a lovely sunny day, with my dogs sat on me because I've got two little dachshunds. And it was really weird because a few months afterwards, I actually found a picture of this woman in exactly this position on a swing seat with two little dogs. And anyway, I bought the picture, and I say to everybody, that's my death spot, that is. But yes, it's nice to actually, it is quite nice to actually think, you know, if I could make it happen, how and where would it be? Because it does then give you an idea of, you know, how close to that ideal you might be able to get, even if you know, obviously I can't call it up just when I'm asleep there on a Sunday afternoon, but it'd be quite nice if I did.
It's really interesting. That's really, really interesting. Yes, Tessie. You're on mute. It's okay.
Sorry. Sorry, if I was just going to say that if I didn't know now what the definition of a good death is, this is what I would think of as a good death. You know, this really ideal, kind of idyllic idea of, you know, in your house on a field in the sunset, you know, with your dogs, I guess, and your loved ones perhaps. But you know, this is, sorry, but I mean, it would be great if it happened, but it's not, you know,
Not
it's
likely.
not super realistic, I guess. But I think a lot of people, you know, who don't really, yeah, that would be an ideal death, yeah.
I think it's quite it's an interesting one, because I think we all have a bit of a fantasy about it. It's a bit the fantasy we have about what's going to be like in 10 years' time, you know, when we're teenagers, okay, and you go like, what's going to be like when I'm older, okay, and then those fantasies kind of change, and but that space is really interesting, because you know it's I think it ties it where you feel happy, and it's a huge, I find it's an oxymoron here, because you've got something which is going to make other people very sad, one's death, uh, and where you're probably going to find peace. Like here I am on this beautiful swing with my dogs, you know, in the little sunshine, you know, where you feel at peace with yourself. And it's a very charged um, setting, really, because it's about, you know, actually that would be nice to end like that, you know, you end in a high, in a good, peaceful way, but then of course the reality might be that it's not that, but the reality is that, you know, people are going to grieve and be very upset, and I think it's a very good way of, the way I see it, of compensating all the stuff that we don't want to listen to, we don't want to hear or think about, because it just becomes this beautiful fantasy. Now, Delphine has said something, says, where we die, is it about the location itself or about who is there and the quality of the place, feeling like home and safe and loved? She says she's met people not comfortable to let their ones deal with the dead body at home and prefer to die in a comfortable place, could be a hospital. So yes, that's, you know, that's a big question. A big question. Does it matter in the end where we die? You know, in the end, is it about having the loved ones with you, or your dogs, or, you know, persons you love? Is it about not being a burden to other people, even though I hate that personally? I hate the idea that one becomes a burden to somebody else, because that's not how we are. But you know, a lot of people think of it that way. Tessie?
I guess it's also kind of feeds in how you yourself, if you are dying and you are scared, you know, your relatives will suffer more with you, because they see how you're anxious and how you're afraid, and you know how you're looking at this. But it's kind of difficult for you, obviously, if you are scared. It's the circle, it's the cycle, I guess. Yeah. I mean, what can you do if you're scared? You know, you shouldn't have to hide it either. If,
No.
you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. Wow, it's 5 to 4. And what ifs? Yes. Madeleine, where are you? There you are. Sorry, you've moved on my screen. What is about the what ifs?
I think, you know, when I hear of people in retrospect afterwards, it's the, you know, what if I had done this? What if I had done that? And therefore, I think, you know, when I think about, you know, my own experiences, and if I, you know, if I can, where would I choose to die? the questions also come to my head, well, what if I need help? What if there's complications? How will that affect other people? What is the impact? You know, those kind of what ifs is, you know, just the
Absolutely.
examples of what comes to mind, because it feels like it's quite complicated and quite a responsibility.
It is.
And I'm wondering if that's necessary or just, you know, we make it that way. Like grief and death has become so complicated, I feel. And I'm wondering if, you know, as humans, does it need to be in the rawest forms? It could, is it, you know, like the bureaucracy of, you know, dealing with someone's death, it just feels like it's a money-making machine at times, rather than just keeping it simple at a time when we really need it to be.
No,
Yeah.
I think
So it brings up a lot of what ifs. That's where that thing is stemmed from.
no,
my
that's
thinking.
it's interesting in what Anna said before about how people's perception or needs change, or if not needs really, but kind of choices for wherever they're going to be cremated, or you know, being in one place, wherever they're going to be buried, and from anecdotal kind of data that I have been kind of not collecting but listening to people. It's interesting that, you know, at some point you say, yeah, you know, fine, it doesn't matter what it is, and then, you know, depending in what happens, let's say they're children, okay, so somebody says, oh no, I want to be buried somewhere, I want to be as a whole for some in a place wherever it's cremated, and then in a in a graveyard, because I want my kids to go and meet me. And that was really interesting in the kind of data I had, where, you know, there was people with young kids that they didn't want to be cremated. They wanted to have space for the kids to go to, or people who might have older parents. So they were younger and they say, yeah, no, I want to be able for my mother to go somewhere and sit down and speak. So it's very interesting how things kind of change by taking on board all these different parameters, really, about who do you leave back, who do you leave behind, because of course, you know, when I think about dying, I never think that my parents will outlive me. That's my that you know, goes without saying. I don't want to think what would happen if, you know, they're there and I go. And again, that kind of changes quite a lot the process about how people then decide how they're going to be, how the body is going to be dealt with after the death, where they might die, wherever it's at home, or wherever it's going to be in a hospice, or, you know, hospital, you know, and again, the kind of death, if it's, you know, a sudden death where there's no choice, or, you know, an illness. But thank you that it's only 1 minute before we have to go, and I don't want to keep you longer than the 2 hours, but have you got any comments that you would like to share with us before we say our goodbyes?
Thank you, everybody. It's been a very human conversation. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Not
Yeah,
sure if it's helped you though, Virginia, with architecture and places.
Oh, it's great. It's great. It's very, very good.
I just wanted to know if there was sort of a newsletter for the Association of Study of Death and Society, because I'm not really on social medias at all, and I would still like to be updated with what's happening and the next workshops, lectures, everything.
Yeah, if you go to deathandsociety.org, you can sign up for the newsletter there. There's also on there, rather than me just posting loads of links in here, there's a tab on that which is for the online event series. So we have events running through each month through to July, and then they'll pause for a little while and then resume again in September. But you can also propose to host your own event if you'd like to as well. On that form, so it can be a workshop or a talk or whatever you'd like. But yeah, all the information is on there to sign up for a newsletter or become a member or propose your own event or do lots of other things.
Great,
but yeah,
thank you
just
very
reach
much.
out if you have any questions. Yeah, and thank you, Virginia. That's been a fascinating couple of hours.
Thank you. No, thank you everybody for sharing your thoughts so openly and, you know, having such a lovely, lovely conversation. Thank you very much. And keep in touch. You know, it would be lovely to keep in touch. Thank you.